Hey guys, Tanner from CMG Mortgage. Just wanted to go through a little bit of mortgage rate cycles. You're obviously hearing a lot of people talking about how interest rates are going to go down. So I figured I might as well go through why people are saying that. You have a lot of people that are like, okay, sure, they'll go down because you expect it to. Well, it's not just because the mortgage industry expects it to, or real estate agents expect it to, or anything like that. We're going off of historical information. And this is some of that historical information that I figured I'd go through. And we don't need to go line by line in this scenario, but I want to talk about in particular the trends and the cycles that we see when it comes to mortgage rates. So let's start back in the 80s with, as you can see, the Fed chairs of Burns and Volcker. During that time frame, inflation was actually already pretty high. You can see that it started at about 7% during that time frame, and it got all the way up to about 14%. So considerably higher than even what we saw during this COVID period. Interest rates then started to have to increase because, and you can see they increased from about 12% to about 18.6%, because the Fed had to step in and increase what are called the federal funds rates. And these federal fund rates are not rates that you get as an individual. This is what banks lend to each other, what the federal government lends, so on and so forth. But they had to raise these federal funds rates to more or less make it more expensive to lend money, for people to borrow money. And that slowdown of money then entering the economy, people buying less things, created the economy to slow down and slow down inflation. So you can see that the column under inflation response was after the Fed raised their Fed funds rates, inflation eventually started to go back down. So it started at that 14%, eventually got back down to about 5%. And when it did start getting into those lower ranges, interest rates followed suit by dropping back down, coinciding with these federal fund rates decreases. So you can see mortgage rates went from 18%, which, holy cow, that wouldn't be fun right now, down to 12%, which still wouldn't be fun, but it's considerably better than 18, right? Consequences during that time frame, the S&P, S&P index overall. So obviously there's a lot of different ways to gauge stock market. We're just talking about the S&P for right now. But in that example, S&P went down pretty considerably when the economy slowed dramatically, as it should. And there was a recession period that followed that caused, obviously, a little bit further drop in rates and stuff like that in this example. Alan Greenspan had another time frame. You can read through the numbers. You don't need to listen to me on all of that. But the mortgage rate response after the Fed decreased inflation was that mortgage rates started dropping back down as well. Same scenario. We had a recession. The stock market took a little bit of a hit. And by a little bit, I mean a big hit. And now we're in the Jerome Powell time frame, where you can see that during COVID, inflation went from 1.75% up to 9.1%. So very large increase, again, on the inflation front. Fed funds rates were increased up to the current range, which is 5.5%. Mortgage rates obviously followed and went up from 2.5 range to 8%. Inflation, luckily, is starting to go back down. We're seeing these indicators in a lot of the different reports that are coming out. Right now, we've seen it drop from about 9.1% down to 3.7 in this example, but depending on, again, which index that indice you're following in regards to which report you're following, there's a bunch of obviously different numbers that come into play here. But inflation has decreased nicely, which should mean, as you can see over in the mortgage rate response, should mean that once these numbers are consistently down, the Fed is no longer needing to increase the Fed funds rates. They, in fact, start decreasing the Fed funds rates to re-stimulate the economy. We should see then a decline in mortgage rates as inflation declines. And right now, we don't know the consequences of these federal fund increases and the aftermath of inflation going down, rates going down, economy slowing down, so on and so forth. But right now, there's probably a decent chance that the stock market won't be super happy when the economy slows to its furthest point, when it does, if it does, and there could be a recession again, right? We don't know that officially yet because we haven't passed that time frame, but there's a lot of indicators that show that that could come into play, though the Fed still feels pretty confident that they could give us what's called a soft landing and miss that recession period. We'll obviously see how that goes. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a breakdown. These are, we're using numbers on where these expectations are coming from. This is not something that people are just pulling out of their head because, hey, rates went up, they should go down. We're following the standard history of what happens when inflation rises, the Fed increases Fed funds rates, inflation starts to go back down, and then the economy slows down and rates go down. So hopefully that makes pretty good sense to you. Let me know if you have any questions there. We'll start seeing the next cycle as it progresses, and keep giving you more and more info. Tanner with CMG.